On August 20th, 1949, the Washington Post published a story in the paper titled, "Priest Frees Mount Rainier Boy Reported Held in Devil's Grip." The article was referring to the allegedly true demonic possession of a 13-year-old boy named Ronald Edwin Hunkler, a regular kid growing up in Cottage City, Maryland. The horrifying events outlined in the paper were so unbelievable that the story spread like wildfire and soon became the inspiration for several films and literary works, including William Peter Blatty's best-selling novel, The Exorcist, which would soon make its way onto the big screen in 1973 and become world-renowned as one of the most terrifying horror movies of all time. Hey everyone, Ordinary Horror Guy here, and this is the true story of the St. Louis exorcism. Before we get started, I want to point out that most of the more commonly accepted evidence provided in this case was largely hearsay. Things such as where the boy actually lived, where the exorcisms took place, and who was present during them were all later proven to be false. The only trusted primary source that has ever come out of this case is the diary of Raymond J. Bishop, who was one of the attending priests. The diary documents the day-by-day occurrences in full detail, so most of the information in this video will come straight from that source. With that out of the way, let's get right into the story. Ronald Edwin Hunkler was born on June 1st, 1935 into a German Lutheran family in Cottage City, Maryland. It's worth noting that in earlier sources he was referred to as Roland Doe or Robbie Mannheim, which were just aliases that were used to protect his identity. Growing up, he was an only child, so he was pretty lonely most of the time and relied on the adults in his family to play with him and keep him company. His immediate family consisted of his father, mother, grandparents, and Aunt Harriet, who Ronald took a particular liking to. They were very close, and she was the one who played with him most often. Interestingly, she happened to be an avid spiritualist, so she was into all sorts of mystical practices such as seances, rituals, and especially Ouija boarding. Over time, Ronald expressed his interest in the Ouija board after his Aunt Harriet taught him how to use it. She even got him his own as a birthday gift one year, and he was instantly hooked. She thought it would be a fun pastime activity for the two to bond over, and as a spiritualist herself, she saw nothing wrong with it. For the longest time, no notable paranormal activity occurred as they were using it. However, by the time Ronald had turned 13, he eventually opened himself up to an unparalleled evil. It all started on January 15th, 1949. Ronald was conversing with his grandmother in her bedroom when they suddenly began hearing a faint dripping noise, almost like a leaky faucet. So their initial thought was that there must be some sort of problem with the pipes, or a sink might have accidentally been left on. But as they started searching around for the noise, they eventually found themselves fixated on a picture on the wall. A picture of Jesus. It was shaking as if there had been some sort of impact on the wall behind it, but they never heard a loud bang and there wasn't any reason for the wall to have been hit. As they're staring at this picture trying to figure out what's causing the movement, the shaking and dripping noises suddenly stop. Waiting in total silence, Ronald and his grandmother couldn't help but feel freaked out. His parents eventually arrived at the house later that evening, and he told them everything that happened. But right as they finished their conversation, another eerie sound caught their attention. It sounded like a constant scratching beneath the floorboards. Again, they tried to pinpoint where the noise was coming from, and they eventually circled back to the grandmother's room. The sound was coming from the floorboards right near her bed, and it continued to persist every night between the hours of 7 in the afternoon and midnight. Ronald's parents didn't believe this to be a cause for concern and chalked the noises up to just some rodent that happened to stumble beneath the floorboards. This would explain why it came back each day around the same time. They reassured him that everything was going to be alright, and they soon called an exterminator to take care of it. He came within the next couple of days and sprayed a poisonous chemical beneath the floorboards, which would undoubtedly kill the rodent if it were down there. That same evening, the exterminator eventually left, but the noises still persisted, and this time they were even louder than before. It continued for 10 days straight and finally stopped. Although the entire situation was weird, the family just believed that the poison took a little while to kill the rodent, and they eventually put the whole thing behind them. After these events, Ronald's Aunt Harriet unfortunately passed away at the age of 54 due to multiple sclerosis. Over the next couple of weeks, he was completely devastated and depressed, not wanting to really do anything except mourn her death. And that's when the noises came back. That same scratching sound beneath the floorboards. However, this time it wasn't coming from the grandmother's room on the second story of the house. It was coming from downstairs, directly in Ronald's bedroom. Throughout the day, they never heard any noises, and it was only when Ronald decided to climb into bed for the night that they started to occur. One night, while Ronald, his mother, and grandmother were sitting on his bed, they experienced something new that scared them stiff. It was these slow, creepy footsteps walking back and forth from the edge of the bed to the back wall over and over again. This is when the family finally started to put 2 and 2 together. They wondered if the noises had somehow been linked to the passing of Aunt Harriet, which was kind of odd considering that they started before she passed away. As the footsteps continued, Ronald's mother suddenly shouted, "Is this you, Aunt Harriet?" She asked it to knock on the floor to see if it was indeed the spirit of their deceased family member, to which it responded back with 3 knocks as wind rushed past their faces. At this point, the family didn't know whether to be scared or comforted by the fact that Aunt Harriet's spirit was seemingly inside of the house. But as future events unfolded, it would be revealed that whatever was in the house was not Aunt Harriet at all, but something far more evil. As the days went on, Ronald would walk into his bedroom to find random tears in his mattress, and after he continued to ignore it, the tears would be replaced by violent shaking. Various random items were also thrown around the house from time to time, such as food, clothing, and furniture. By February 26th, the tears from the mattress eventually moved on to Ronald himself. All over his body appeared these deep scratch marks. They almost looked like they had been done by a monstrous claw. They continued for 4 successive nights until the lesions eventually turned into written words. This is when Ronald's family knew that something had to be done. So his mother began searching around for potential ways that she could help her son. She reached out to several local Lutheran ministers for any insight, and she soon met Luther Miles Scholes. He was extremely helpful and agreed to have the boy spend the night at his house to see if he would experience any supernatural activity. And sure enough, he got what he asked for. During the night, as Ronald was sleeping, he heard the same eerie clawing sounds under the floorboards. He immediately went into a state of panic and began praying in hopes that the evil spirit would vanish, but it only got louder. At one point, Ronald began violently convulsing in his bed, leading Scholes to tie him to a chair until he eventually calmed down. However, the chair immediately threw itself backward onto the floor as Scholes watched in pure terror. After this incident, a Catholic priest located in Mount Rainier, Maryland, named Father Edward Hughes, was asked for advice on the boy's situation. He never actually met Ronald in person, but he suggested the family use blessed candles and holy water throughout the home, accompanied by intense prayer to hopefully ward off the evil presence. However, it only made things worse. The bottle of holy water used was reportedly shattered, and the prayers only made the evil spirit more violent and aggravated. Running out of options, Ronald's mother began to contact more and more specialists for help, ranging from psychiatrists to actual spiritualists, but none of them were able to remedy any of the activity occurring at the Cottage City house. She eventually settled on getting Ronald away from the home. She happened to be a native St. Louisan, so she had many family members in Missouri who were willing to help her out. Ronald was taken to the home of his non-Catholic aunt and uncle, where several other family members would also come around to visit. Ronald's mother had hoped that whatever was plaguing her son would go away if she went to live somewhere else. However, disappointment came when the activity didn't stop and even increased in the following weeks. By March 8th, 2 aunts, 4 uncles, and 4 cousins had all witnessed furniture moving around on its own, the violent shaking and tearing of Ronald's mattress, and the visible scratch marks that would appear all over his body. One cousin in particular was extremely concerned for his safety and tried to do all that he could to figure out what was going on. He happened to be a college student, and one of his classes was taught by Father Raymond J. Bishop, a local Catholic priest. After he was consulted on behalf of the strange events Ronald and his family were experiencing, he was intrigued by the story and agreed to provide assistance to the boy. Another clergyman eventually got involved named Father William Bowdern, and over the course of the week, they tried several different methods of combating the alleged demonic possession. This ranged from dousing Ronald's bed in holy water to pinning different relics of saints to his pillow as a form of spiritual protection. However, this did absolutely nothing. Father Bowdern and Bishop even started to get frightened as the relics in holy water were tossed in defiance by an invisible entity. By March 16th, things began to escalate as the clergyman attempted to conduct real exorcisms on Ronald. Due to the increasingly shocking events, a third clergyman was thrown into the mix named Father Walter Holleran. Over the course of 6 days, they performed several exorcisms, each resulting in terrifying outcomes. As they began the process, several lacerations were made all over the boy's body as he screamed in agony. Mind you, Ronald's hands were outside of the bed covers, so the clergyman knew he wasn't doing it to himself. His wounds even started to bleed slightly. A picture of the devil began to engrave on his left leg, as the word hell was slashed across his chest in such a way that if Ronald looked down, he could read it perfectly. Other lacerated words across his body revealed that the evil spirit could supposedly only leave through excrement or urination. The second phase of the exorcism continued as Ronald was asleep. The clergyman began praying and dousing him in holy water when he started violently shaking and punching his backboard and pillow as he let out a blood-curdling scream. He would later say that at the time he was in a dreamlike state, appearing to be in a physical confrontation with the devil, surrounded by other demons in a dark, fiery place. The next day, Ronald's father had flown in from Maryland after hearing about the unbelievable events that were taking place. Over the course of several days, the clergyman attempted to bless the boy, but he began throwing tantrums and spitting in the direction of the men in his family. In further exorcisms, he began attempting to physically vomit out the evil spirit, but to no avail. He became hysterical, cursing at the clergymen with violent laughter, calling them assholes and bitches and shouting religious obscenities as he began manically urinating himself. When he later awoke out of his trance, he claimed the urine had burned and he felt as though he were sick. By March 21st, the family was losing sleep, and the clergyman arranged for Ronald to be taken to the Alexian Brothers Hospital in South St. Louis in case there was a medical emergency. He was given a room away from the other patients so they couldn't hear his outbursts. Due to his growing concern, Ronald's father was also given a bed in the same room so he could comfort his son. However, upon his arrival at the hospital, Ronald didn't calm down. He began urinating himself 5 or 6 different times, and his language eventually became disgustingly perverted and sexual towards the clergyman, referring to genitalia and sexual acts. Throughout his time here, he began to fall ill, and he would continue to have his violent outbursts. He wasn't getting good sleep and was always in a constant state of distress when he wasn't under demonic attack. After failed subsequent exorcisms taking place at the hospital, Ronald's mother and father thought it might be best to convert from Lutheran to Catholicism. Ronald was scheduled to be baptized in the next couple of days, and his parents hoped that it might grant some sort of spiritual protection. On April 1st, the baptism took place, but with much difficulty as Ronald kept spiraling into violent episodes. And to the parents' frustration, it did absolutely nothing. Ronald still continued to spit, curse, and have terrifying outbursts. The next day, Ronald was eventually given Holy Communion, which is a Christian Catholic ritual practiced as a remembrance of Jesus' sacrifice. After much struggle, the family and clergymen decided to take Ronald back home since no other remedies were working. However, at the house, he was always in an extreme state of fear. He didn't want to be alone and kept attempting to come downstairs, but everyone decided it was best that he stay in bed and rest. As he walked upstairs back to his bedroom, he suddenly grabbed the reliquary cross off his wall until he was stopped by one of the attending priests. As he wouldn't let go, he grabbed the priest's open Ritual Romanum book and tore 4 pages out of the exorcism formula. As he went into another spell, the clergyman restrained him to his bed and attempted to calm him down with another exorcism right away. After being asked questions in Latin, he responded in the same language which he had never learned before. He experienced the same scratches across his body, and by this point, Ronald was on the brink of insanity. He later told his family that he couldn't take it anymore, and the constant exorcisms were physically breaking him. He really wanted to go back to his home in Maryland and begged his father to take him. By April 4th, after a mutual agreement between the clergyman and family, Ronald was granted permission to stay at the Cottage City house for a couple of days, while the priest searched around Washington, D.C. and Baltimore for any hospitals that would allow Ronald to stay. But after hearing the circumstances, none of the hospitals wanted to deal with him. Father Bowdern eventually contacted the Alexian Brothers Hospital again in hopes that they would allow them to stay, to which the request was granted. By April 10th, Ronald had returned to St. Louis to the hospital, accompanied by Father Bishop, Bowdern, Holleran, and a number of other priests, where the final exorcisms would commence. And this is when things got completely insane. For the next week, Ronald would endure the final exorcisms, which resulted in the expected activity, the usual kicking, screaming, spitting, and cursing that would often occur. However, there now seemed to be the engraving of the word exit at multiple parts of his body, with an arrow pointing downward to his groin. He exclaimed that his kidneys and groin had this horrible burning sensation that got even worse when he tried to urinate. On April 18th, everything came to a climax. The priests were doing their usual ritual, reading the Principio exorcism prayer, when Ronald suddenly shouted with authority in a sleep-like state, "Satan, Satan, I am Saint Michael, and I command you, Satan, and the other evil spirits, to leave the body in the name of Dominus immediately." He then went through 8 minutes of violent convulsions until he finally came to a calm state, saying, "He's gone." He later stated that he was in a dreamlike state where he saw a physical manifestation of Saint Michael, the holy archangel known for vanquishing Satan. Ronald claimed he saw the angel banish Satan back to a fiery pit as he suddenly awoke from out of a sleeping stupor. As of that day, Ronald Hunkler had never experienced anything supernatural since. After the events, he and his family continued their lives as devout Catholics in Maryland, and the priest even stated that he became a fine young man. He never spoke publicly on behalf of the events, and it took nearly 70 years for experts to find out who he actually was. Sadly, he died recently in 2020 due to a stroke at the age of 85, but his story would inspire many for years to come. But that's going to be the end of today's video. I hope you guys did enjoy, and if you want to know about the story of the famous Bell Witch haunting, click on this video right here. Thank you all once again, and have yourselves a great day.